Hey, peace and love, everybody. This is Royce Fletcher Thomason here, back for another live broadcast on YouTube and on Facebook, and just wanting to spread more love, more light, more grace, more peace, more empowerment to the people. All right, and so we've been going through this series on honor. Today is, what is today's date? Today is the 13th of June, 2021. It's the third in a series that we're doing on honor. The first week was on honoring Jesus. This last week was on honoring your body. And this week, today's topic is dealing with honoring your journey. Honoring your journey. And the fact of the matter is that we all, every single 7 billion of us on planet Earth at this time, we're all on a journey, right? We're all on a journey. Not all of us are on the same journey. All of our journeys look a little bit different, have their own nuances. Some of us are consciously on a journey of growth, of discovery, of understanding, on a journey of ultimately a spiritual journey is what we're all on. And some of us are consciously aware of that journey. Some of us, not so much so. That's the farthest thing from some people's minds and awareness. But the reality is that we really are all on a journey. My prayer is that we can find our way on our journey and walk in the way in which we are actually led to walk as we are working out our own salvation, as it were, as we're in the process of learning how to live as souls embodied as human beings on planet Earth at this particular junction in human history, right? And so in the context of honoring our journey, there's this story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, about a guy many of you have heard of him before, Abraham, or Abraham, as you typically hear his name pronounced. And his story kind of goes from the 11th chapter in the book of Genesis through the 25th chapter in the book of Genesis. He's really, a story is more so starting at the 12th chapter, but he's introduced in the 11th chapter. It talks about his father and his family lineage and whatnot, beginning in the 11th chapter. That's where we're first introduced to him. And his name didn't start off Abraham. It started off Avram. Okay, and his name later ended up being changed. But in the story of this man who's been significant in biblical history and history as a whole, his story really kind of, where we're introduced to his story, he had a wife whose name was Sarai, later changed to Sarah. And just as his name was changed from Abram to Abraham. And in this journey, that's really the nature, in essence, of Abraham's story, of Abraham's story, is that he was called to take a journey. He was, in his hometown, if you will. There were some things going on with the family that were not really in alignment with where his destiny was ultimately to lead him. And so he ended up being called to leave what was familiar to him, as many of us have. All of us were kind of indoctrinated in certain things, in terms of where we grew up, the families that we came up in terms of, various ideologies, our mindset regarding a lot of things, our kind of political ideologies, our religious belief systems. And a lot of those things are really kind of indoctrinated in us when we're young, and in our families of origin, in our communities, where we've been socialized, if you will, where we've learned. And Abram was actually, he was married to Sarai. He ended up being led by God to go on a journey, to leave his hometown and go somewhere else. And on a certain level, yes, to leave where he physically lived, but on a whole nother level, to leave that place where he had previously been in terms of his mindset, in terms of his awareness, in terms of his life journey as a whole, and go to what for him at that journey was, I think about this Star Trek movie called The Undiscovered Country. What for him was a new place, a place where he would have to let go of some old things. He was actually told by God to, leave this place, leave your family behind. Um, he partially did that and he partially didn't. His wife was supposed to have gone with him, but he also brought his cousin with him. And his cousin would actually end up being a vessel through which some hardship would come to him that would have not otherwise been necessary for him to have experienced. So he ended up inviting his cousin Lot to go on this journey with him. In the process of his journey, and I'm not going to tell all of these things necessarily in order, but just kind of sharing with you some of the things that unfolded on his journey. In the process of his journey, he ended up being told that he was, going to end up having a lineage that would follow him. Okay, he was, up there in age. His wife was a little older too. He didn't have any reason to believe that he was going to actually have children, but one night while he was on his journey, God had him look up into the sky and told him that his children would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and that there would be blessings upon uh, his family, okay, upon his lineage, right? Along the journey, he would do some things where, quite frankly, he made some mistakes. Like I said, bringing his cousin along. His cousin tried to dupe him and take advantage of him. There were some ways that his cousin had about himself that were not in alignment with necessarily God's perfect will for Abram's life. But he brought him anyway. He dealt through those hardships. He ended up going to various places, Egypt amongst others, and uh, along the way, he actually had his wife say that, to the king or to the pharaoh, that she was his sister rather than his wife. He was nervous. He was concerned. Now, really, I want to share with you real quick too. Really, ultimately, what Abram or Abraham's journey was about was a journey of faith, and that's a key component with this brother. Ultimately, all of us are on a journey of faith, right? I'm going to kind of break some things now too, but I'm going to kind of share a little bit of Abraham's story, and then I'll get into some things, as they relate to my own personal life, and as things would perhaps relate very well to you on your own personal journey, on your journey of faith, your journey that you're walking this life out through, right? Okay, so he said, to his wife, listen, you are a good looking woman. And listen, the head honcho in this country, he's going to want you. He had some stuff. We all have our own issues that we deal with. Even a righteous man, even a just man is still just a man, right? Every human being falls short. Every human being has fears and doubts and things that will creep up. That we need to be mindful of. But anyway, in the case of Abram, His name hadn't been changed yet. He told his wife, "Listen, tell them that I'm your brother, that you're my sister, because I don't want them to kill me to take you because they want you. And if you do that, then you know, yeah, you'll be his at that point. But at least I'll live, and you'll be treated right, and I'll be treated good." And then bad stuff started happening. Bad stuff started happening. Like there are these plagues that started happening. Um, and the king was like, "Look, man, what the heck have you done? What kind of setup has this situation been? Why'd you tell me this woman was your sister?" Now, the reality of the case is, uh, while what he had his wife share wasn't the whole truth, it wasn't exactly a whole lie either. The fact of the matter is, um, Abram and Sarai did not share the same mother, but they did have the same daddy. They did have the same father. So in essence, they were brother and sister. And so yes, he married his sister. Um, we might say that was a grave mistake along his journey. But then he tried to do things to kind of protect himself along the way. Uh, Likely, the time that they spent in Egypt is where Hagar came into their life. Hagar. Oh, and by the way, there were some situations where he had, you know, won some spoils and victory in battle, and came across Melchizedek. Powerful. I talked about him, I think, the week before last a little bit. He was the king of Salem, or Shalom, or the king of peace, and his name Melchizedek, Melech, Tzaddik, king, righteousness. So he was the king of peace and the king of righteousness. He actually paid his tithes to Abram, paid his tithes to Melchizedek. At any rate, there are times along this journey where God makes these promises to Abram, enters into covenants with Abram, ends up changing his name to Abraham, has his wife's name changed from Sarai to Sarah. And there's just this interesting journey that unfolds. Part of that journey is, um, times where, frankly, their faith got weak. He was up in age. His wife was up in age. They had this promise from God that they were going to have these children, that he would be the father of many nations and all of this stuff, right? And in the natural, in the material world, there's like no evidence of that whatsoever. They can't see that there's any likelihood that this promise that was made, this message that he heard from God, was actually going to come to pass, because he was up old in age. His wife was up there in age. So they ended up starting to take things into their own hands. How often do we do that? I know there have been plenty of times where I felt like I got a message from God on something, or maybe I didn't quite hear from God on something. I tried to do some stuff in my own strength and in my own understanding based on what I could see. Hmm. So it's interesting to walk by faith when not by sight. But the reality is that uh, Sarah and Abraham came to this agreement. It was not It was not a good situation. It was not a good thing to agree to, because it ended up not paying out the greatest dividends. But what this decision was, Abraham and Sarah had a conversation. She suggested to him, and he agreed. Um, Big mistake, man. Big, big, big mistake. Um, she said, "Listen, I'm up there in age. Go sleep with Hagar. Have a baby with her. And on a certain level, that probably sounded good to Abraham. You know, Hagar is probably a nice looking woman. She was youthful. She was in childbearing years, um, and he did it. You know, he had relations with her. They had a son. That son's name was Ishmael. And boy, as you might imagine, imagine in today's age, a man gets another woman pregnant, gets the maid pregnant. The pregnant has a baby. How's the wife going to respond in that situation? You know, they say happy wife, happy life. If mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And Sarah was not happy with this situation. She started feeling like Hagar was maybe disrespecting her a little bit because she had her husband's baby. I mean, that whole situation was just a disaster waiting to happen. It was a big mistake on Abraham's part. Ultimately, Sarah gave him an ultimatum. Said, listen, you send this woman and her child away or I'm gone. And he did that. And he sent her away, sent the child away. Really didn't have much to do with the child after that. There's some people out there who are dealing with the pain of a father who's absentee, who's been absentee, who's not been present in your life. Most men in prison are men who, as boys, didn't have their fathers in their lives. Most women on street corners are women who, as girls, didn't have their fathers in their lives. There is something that is significant about the presence of a father in your life. And next week, next Sunday is Father's Day. We're going to deal with honoring your father. And come back for that. I'm not really going to give too much of a commercial or a preview on that. But that's what we're going to deal with. And if your father isn't in your life, we're still going to deal with that. So don't be ashamed to tap into that. Alexi Holford, good to have you. Welcome. Welcome to the space. Always good to see people, from whether it be from YouTube or from Facebook. So at any rate, he would eventually, after Hagar and Ishmael left, after he sent them away, he actually got Sarah pregnant, and they had a child. That child's name, they named him Isaac. Okay, there's a situation where Abraham, after having been waiting for this child for so long, all the hell that he went through with the situation with Hagar and Ishmael and all of that drama that was going on in the household, he ended up impregnating at an old age. He ended up impregnating his wife, who was in old age, and they had Isaac. And then he ended up feeling led by God to sacrifice that which he had waited on for so long. And as the story goes, he was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, and God got his attention and said, "Hold on, man, don't kill your son. There's a ram over here in this bush. You know, that ram is there and it's available." So he didn't end up having to kill his son. But what ended up happening, and I'll skip some of the story, what ended up happening is that Isaac ended up having a son, Jacob. Actually, Esau and Jacob were twins. Esau came out first. Jacob ended up coming out second, ended up stealing the elder brother's blessing. And there was a whole lot that was going on in that situation, essentially. But ultimately, Jacob, whose name ended up being changed to Israel, ended up having, like a dozen sons who ended up His sons ended up making up, and their children ended up making up the 12 tribes of Israel. But at any rate, this journey that Abram and then Abraham, once his name was changed, had been on, he made a lot of mistakes on his journey. There are things that unfolded in his journey that probably were not the perfect will of God for him in his life at that time, but they were nonetheless part of his journey that ended up being difficult, parts of his journey that probably ended up being unnecessarily difficult, parts of his journey that ended up bringing up pain for him and pain for others. Still to this day, there's tremendous fighting in Israel, between Muslims and Jews. All that is a family feud dealing with one part of the family being disowned and another part seen as being the favored ones, and the pain that has endured as a result of that. And Abraham in his body does not live on the earth today, but there's still aspects of his journey that still need to be worked out. His descendants still need to be brought into a sense of reconciliation. There's still forgiveness that needs to be extended. There's still reconciliation that needs to take place. There's still repentance or changing of one's mind leading to the changing of behavior that still needs to take place so that peace can reign and there can be actually harmony in the family, that there can be unity in the family again. And so just like Abram and then Abraham or Abraham, we're all on a journey and we all make some mistakes along the way. There are things that happen on our journey. We're all in a journey of faith in one way or another, but the things that happen along that journey that may not be in complete alignment with the perfect will of God, but that have nonetheless become part of our journey, because our journeys don't always go in straight lines. They have curves and twists and turns along the way. And because we don't always know exactly where the journey is going on a journey of faith, sometimes we have some missteps along the way. That, by the way, is all that sin is. It's a missing of the mark. It's a getting kind of out of touch along the way somehow. And we all are subject to that. I can tell you that I've been subject to it. There are things just very recently that have come to my awareness about mistakes that I made in my past. It's all been part of my journey, though. It's all been part of my journey. There are some mistakes that you've made in your path, but they're all part of your journey. They're all part of your journey. It was prophesied that I'd be a minister when I was a little child. I had a relationship with God since I was a little boy. I wasn't really necessarily fitting in with everybody, but as a child, I wanted to fit in. And so I would alter things about myself. That continued into adulthood and still shows up at times in different ways. The reality is that my life was set apart a long time ago. Before I was in my mother's womb, I was already ordained to be who I was called to be and do what I was called to do. And sometimes I've gotten it right, and sometimes I haven't gotten it right, but it's all been part of my journey. There was a time where I was, wrestling with the call to ministry, and I kind of put some parameters on God about what I would need to see to accept this call, and God didn't really humor that too much in my case. But things came to a point where it was really undeniable for me that there was a call to ministry on my life, and I began to walk in that path. And as things unfolded, I would end up being led to this particular seminary. I would transfer to another seminary where my college mentor had become president, and some things kind of shifted at that point. There I ended up being kind of disillusioned because, there was a person who had just graduated just before I got there, who graduated with a 4.0, but he was an atheist. And then I was there and really consciously working on a relationship with God and walking in faith. And, some things started being presented to me that who I wasn't really well accepted. Who I wasn't really well accepted by the establishment, as it were. In terms of my walking with faith, there were some things that I really got clear messages on that I needed to do. And, that ended up being kind of frowned upon. Ultimately, I ended up being kicked out of seminary on the basis what the actual official paperwork said for my reason of being kicked out does not demonstrate a promise for ministry. And there was definitely some hurt and some pain that resulted in that. And I wondered, how was I going to work that out? But you see, that was all part of my journey. That was all part of my journey. Could I have stayed at the previous seminary in New Jersey and not transferred to the one in Indiana? Yeah, I could have done that. But all of this ended up being part of my journey. Could I have not wrestled with the call to ministry in the first place and just accepted it? Maybe I could have, but is that really in alignment with what my nature was? Did I need to actually go through the process of the wrestling to accept it, for God to get me to where I needed to be? Maybe. Have there been times in the process of walking out my own journey as a minister where I've gotten some stuff wrong? Absolutely, there have. More times than I care to admit. Is it the case that, I sometimes I feel like it's beneficial for me to be transparent, for you to know that it's okay for you to be transparent and for you to accept that. I have, I've been a romantic my whole life, honestly. That ended up leading me to make some decisions that weren't necessarily in alignment with what God wanted, but in alignment with what I wanted, even in my flesh, some things that I wanted. And then I did, other things to kind of justify, those mistakes, which ended up only making the problem worse, just like Abraham, in the situation with Hagar and having Ishmael. It was a mistake sleeping with that woman in the first place. And then they had the child, and then they end up sending the child off. And the results of that are still going on to this day. Again, hopefully that ends up getting reconciled. And I certainly pray that it is. But, I ended up, shucks, God showed me that there have been mistakes that I've made that I didn't even realize the depth of the mistake at the time, in terms of, or the depth of the result of the mistakes, in terms of sexual decisions, in terms of marital decisions, that even in terms of my faith walk and spirituality and, the uniqueness of my calling and ways that I've kind of even gotten off track where that's concerned. The reality is that all of that has been part of my journey. And the reason that this thing about honoring your journey, I think, is significant is it's really a matter of honoring oneself in terms of coming to a place of self-acceptance. Yes, we've all had some times where we've gotten off track. We've all had some times where we've made some decisions that weren't ultimately the best decisions. The key is, once we recognize that we've made some poor decisions, to do the things that are necessary to get back on track, to course correct and do the things that we need to do to walk back in alignment with where it is that we're really supposed to be going. And part of that also includes, recognizing where the wrong was, but also forgiving ourselves for the areas where we've made those mistakes, forgiving ourselves, genuinely forgiving ourselves for the fact that we have gotten off track. And yes, we hurt ourselves in the process of that. And yeah, we even hurt some other people in the process of that. Even though we may not have intended to do that, that was still the result. And the reality is that all mistakes have consequences, and a deeper reality is that the love and the grace of God is able to cover those mistakes and provide for us opportunities even when we fall short, just like was done with Abraham. He made mistakes all along the way, some bad ones along the way, y'all. But God was able to work things out even in the midst of those mistakes. I'm not saying we need to just go do stuff with the idea that, well, it's okay to make the mistakes because God is going to take care of it. Yes, it's true. It's okay to make mistakes because God is going to take care of them ultimately. But that doesn't mean we need to go willfully doing stuff that's going to get us in trouble. That's what I'd refer to as cheap grace, and it just doesn't work like that. I don't think it's a good. Believe me, I have tried it. I have tried it, and it does not work out well. It just doesn't. And I believe that it's good for a person to learn from their mistakes. But as my brother Damien was sharing as we were having a conversation yesterday, it's much better to learn from somebody else's mistakes. It may be okay for you to learn from your mistakes, but I would much prefer for you to learn from mine if you can. Because I've bumped my head up against the wall enough times. Hopefully you won't have to as well. But even if you do, then perhaps that's just part of your journey. That's just part of you walking out your path the best way, the best that you know how. Just the key is, once you realize that you're off track, don't keep going off track. Course correct and get back on track. When the GPS is leading you somewhere and you make a different turn and that takes you out of the direction of where you're supposed to be going, that doesn't mean keep going south when you're trying to travel north. Just turn around and start going the different direction. All along the way, there are things that God has given us clues about. God saying, you need to make a turn here. There's a brick wall ahead you're going to crash into. You need to turn here. When we fail to turn and we hit that brick wall, it isn't because God was punishing us for not turning. It's that God already saw the danger that was ahead and was trying to prevent us from going through that hardship. And in our hard-headedness, my father used to say growing up that a hard head makes a soft behind. And that hard-headedness, we end up getting a spanking that doesn't feel so good. And the spanking isn't, I don't say that the spanking is God punishing us so much as, because the New Testament says that punishment is, the idea of God punishing us is based out of a sense of fear, that we really don't understand love properly. Okay. That's a message for another day, though. The reality is that every single one of us, you and I, and everybody else on the earth, we just don't get it right sometimes. And as painful as that may be, we need to recognize that that's okay. It's okay that we are having some places on the journey that we're not necessarily intended for our highest and best good, but can still work out for our good. Because in reality, all things are working together for our good. And if we're loving God, if we accept that we are called to fulfill the purposes of God, and we can kind of lay down a sense of shame, because that can be a great temptation where we've messed up along the way. If we can lay down a sense of arrogance in terms of trying to do stuff without God, that's what Abraham was trying to do, having a kid with Hagar. That stuff didn't work out well. He ended up being able to have the child with his wife anyway, right? I don't know why this stuff isn't working out too well. That's the challenge with the green screen. Sometimes it just acts goofy. So forgive me if you see my shirt looking like semi-translucent. I'm not disappearing. But at any rate, I want to encourage you. And right now, even on my journey right now, there's some things that are very, very important to me personally, right? Personally, where I realized that I tried to take some things into my hands a long time ago. There's a promise that I feel like God has given me recently. It's kind of blown my mind in a way. And right now, there's some things that kind of look like that would be impossible for that to unfold. But there's some areas where God is calling me to walk out this journey and to walk it out in faith, trusting that all things are working together for my good, trusting that I do what I am called to do, what I feel God telling me to do, and God will do what only God can do. That's tough because we as human beings, I know that and I'm sure you do too, want to have some sense of control, right? The reality is we aren't in control of anything. We're not in control of anything. And that can be scary. That can be scary because it leaves a lot to the unknown. And that's where we really have to walk in faith. It's not faith when you can see how stuff is going to work out. It's not faith until you don't know how it's going to happen, but you just know that it will, right? And you walk out that thing according to how you're feeling guided and directed along the way. Okay. And so, there's some things I'm being challenged to do. There's some things that are totally outside of my control, but I pray every day for God to give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, because there are plenty of things that I can't change, I have no control over. And also to give me the courage and the determination and the discipline to do that which is mine to do, that which I am called to do, and make those changes that are necessary with a recognition that I can't really make any lasting change without the intervention of God present and at work in that, and to help me to know the difference between that which is mine to do and that which isn't, right? And so I go forward in faith on this journey. I encourage you to go forward in faith on this journey. And part of this thing about honoring your journey is because if you can't honor your own journey, if you can't forgive yourself for the mistakes that you've made in your life, if you can't accept yourself as you are, including all of the missteps that you've taken on your journey, then it makes it very difficult for you to keep from judging and condemning people on their journey. The fact is, we're all on a journey and we've all effed it up some along the way. Forgive my colorful expression of that. We all have. That's just real. That's just real. We've all botched stuff up along the way. And if you can come to accept the fact that you're a person on a journey, and this other person, every other person, is on a journey, your journey may not look exactly like someone else's. I don't do a lot of the stuff that a lot of other people do, but I'm not in a position to judge anybody who does things that I wouldn't do, because the reality is I've done some stuff that wasn't right either. The reality is I've made some mistakes along the way too. And that doesn't mean that I justify what I do. It doesn't mean that I condemn you for what you do. But the reality is that we all are in need of grace. We're all in need of grace, and just as we need the grace of God and the grace of people who care about us when we don't get things right along the way, we need to be able to extend grace to other people. We need to extend grace to our children when they do things that we already knew was going to be something that wasn't going to work out well for them. We need to extend grace to our friends, to our family, to our loved ones, to our parents who didn't get it right all the time when they were raising us, and now we still have issues that we're trying to work out. We need to give them some grace. They were walking out their journey the best that they knew how at that given point. We need to extend grace to those people who we're in romantic relationship with, whether it be spouse or someone that we're just in the process of courting or dating. We need to extend some grace to them, acknowledging that they're on their journey. That doesn't mean give folk a license to just do all kind of stupid stuff, but we do need to extend some grace. We do need to honor the fact that their journey may look very different than ours, that we may need to acknowledge that there's some steps that they may take on their journey that end up having a painful impact on us. The reality is that there's some things in your journey that you've done that have had a negative impact or a painful impact on other people too. And my prayer is that we can, through the grace of God, continue to go forward on our journey, that we can go forward in a spirit of forgiveness, accepting forgiveness for ourselves, forgiving ourselves for those things that we've not gotten right on our journey, and we can forgive others for the things that they've not gotten right on their journey, and that we can all go forward in a greater degree of acceptance, peace, grace, and love. Okay? That's what I believe is key for us to really be able to walk this journey out successfully. We've got to do it with faith, and we've got to do it with some forgiveness and some grace. And otherwise, I don't know that it's going to work out too well. In fact, I'd be willing to bet my bottom dollar that without that, it will not work out favorably. Okay. The good news is we can always choose differently. We can always make a different choice. I just hope that we won't wait too long to make the different choice, because the longer we wait, the more consequences we end up having to experience that aren't necessarily favorable consequences. My grandfather used to say all the time, God rest your soul, Grandpa John A. Hall. You can't plant tomatoes and expect to grow corn. The seeds that we sow do end up reaping a harvest. And I hope that on our journey that we'll plant the seeds that will result in the harvest that we're ultimately wanting to reap. Okay. And it's going to require some faith. There'll be some things that God challenges us to do along the way. There'll be some things that God challenges us to refrain from doing along the way. And I hope that we'll all do that we'll all make this faith journey truly in faith and grace, and not try to too often just do stuff in our own strength and based on our own intellect or our own understanding or what makes sense to us on a human level, because some of the stuff just isn't going to make sense. Layla, it's so good to see you. Many, many blessings to you. Grace and peace to all of us. Grace and peace to all of us. For me, I can say that although I haven't always talked about it in this journey, the reality is that I am a minister of the gospel, and I never stopped being that. Even though, a lot of people that I interact with are on their own journey. I still don't want that to be missed. Versandra is in the house. Yes, Versandra, we'll be together. Optimal Living Education and Retreats this evening at 7, broadcasting on Facebook. And I definitely encourage you all to tune into that. And much love to Versandra. Versandra is just an awesome being to me. Someone who's on her journey and whose journey has taken her to a lot of interesting places. But I really want to encourage all of us to just invite God into our journey. To just invite God into our journey, because the reality is that the journey that we're on is a journey in God anyway. And it's not one we can successfully make without God. And so I invite all of us to consciously welcome God into our hearts and into our minds as we work out this thing called life, as we're working out our own salvation. For me, Yeshua HaMashiach has been central to that. I invite you to invite him into your heart as well. I invite you to forgive yourself for all of the missteps that you've made. The reality is that there is grace that is available to you. And yet, those areas where you've made mistakes, you don't have to continue making those mistakes just because you made them in the past. You don't have to condemn yourself to your past, regardless of what mistakes you've made. You go forward now from here, doing right as you know to do. Let us forgive those who we feel have done us wrong. And forgiving them doesn't mean that we continue to walk in a journey with them necessarily. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we forgive them and we politely remove them from our lives. But the key is that we keep a pure heart in the process. We don't need to subject ourselves to abuse of any sort. But that doesn't mean that we need to hold a callous place in our heart or that we need to wish anyone else ill. Just like God promised to Abraham, those who bless him, God will bless. Those who curse them, bad things will happen to them. And I know that that is a reality of my life. The double shall return to anyone for any intention that they have towards me, but yet I don't. And I've seen that happen, by the way. And yet I don't wish anybody ill. I don't wish that upon anyone. I pray grace and peace are fulfilled in every single one of us. And yeah, all of us lose our way along the journey somehow. And God, I pray that for everybody listening today, whether it be on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, on Instagram, on any other platform, whether live or in a playback, I pray, oh God, that your grace may be upon them. I pray that they may feel your presence active and alive in their lives. I pray, oh God, that they may have the grace to walk out this journey faithfully, forgiving themselves, forgiving others, for the things that have happened along the way that haven't been for the greatest. But the reality is that all of these things are working together for our good. Help us to know that, God. Help us to resist the temptation to try to do things in our own strength, to resist the temptation to bypass you along our journey. All of us have this ego, this part of us that tries to edge God out. Help us to move beyond that false sense of self and to walk in our true selves as the children of God that you call us to be. Help us to receive that into our lives. Help us to receive your spirit and to lay aside any false awareness, any false teaching, any false beliefs about ourselves or anything else that would serve as a hindrance in our relationship with you. May we all walk in covenant with you on your promises that you have for us, for our lives, for our families. May peace reign and love reign in the hearts of all people everywhere. And may we have the boldness to go forward victoriously and faithfully, independent of what things might look like on the outside. When we have heard from you, and please let us hear from you clearly, undeniably. Let us hear from you that which you are calling us to think, say, and do. And may we walk out our lives in full alignment with that, independent of what circumstances might seem like on the outside, independent of who might judge us along the way, or who might think that we're strange, or who might think that that's crazy. God, may we feel greater safety and security walking in faith with you than walking in what we can see with other people. May we trust that your grace is sufficient for us and for our lives. May we love ourselves enough to accept the peace of God that passes all understanding, to forgive ourselves, to forgive others, to receive the bountiful blessings that you have in store for us. There's a cornucopia of good, a horn of plenty that you desire for us. Let us empty our cups so that you can fill us up to the point of running over. The blessings might spill over into the lives of everybody we come in contact with, and that a drop of heaven may be left behind wherever we go. In the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ, I give great thanks, and I thank you for it all, affirming it is done, it is done, it is done. Ashe and amen. God bless you all. I wish you much good. Many good things might unfold for you in the course of the balance of this day, the remainder, or the week that is to come. If you want to sow into what we're doing, contribute, we're certainly open and receptive to that and we'll welcome it. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the Cash App, $ Royce F. Thomason, Thomason with an A, not a P. We certainly welcome that, and we pray God's blessings upon you for your generosity if you so choose to do that. We'll be back next Sunday, honoring the ancestors, honoring family lineage, and special focus on honoring fathers, honoring your father, even specifically. And there's places that we're going to go with that next week, the 27th of June. Next week, the 20th of June. God bless you. I love you. I wish you much peace. Take care.